Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So I took some time to go ahead and sketch out what the layout of my yard and where the garden beds are. So when you look at this map, it is to scale, at least on the outer dimensions for sure. But keep in mind, it's mostly just to give you an idea of how the garden bed and the garden is set up and laid out. I've gone through and labeled most everything. So this video is going to be mostly mentioning some of the things that I didn't label, largely because they're too small for me to fit the label on here. But I'll give an explanation on a few other things like the water flow and where I came up with some of these numbers here and how that works. So let's get into it. First thing I want to draw your eye to is this space here with my mouse. This space here is wild space, wooded area. Now, if you look at the color, this area here, I'll move my mouse to, it's the same color. And so there's no indication the difference between lawn, which is where my mouse is right now, and wooded area. And that's because in terms of functionality, it's pretty much the same. I use my lawn clippings as mulch. I use the trimmings from the wooded area as wood chips, mulch. So it's an important part if you're trying to do your garden in a self-sufficient manner. If you don't want your business or to be dependent upon external suppliers as much, like I've mentioned in many of my videos, is one of my goals. Then you're going to have to dedicate space to growing your inputs. So, I want to mention that, and mainly because there's no color differential between wooded area, like wild native space, and lawn. But that's because eventually this lawn will be converted to native grasses, or the Bermuda grass will be eradicated. So I'm not too worried about it, but the space that's not growing any type of edible crops will roughly be about the same. So that's why you see this color. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is this gray area that my mouse is on. It is a couple of lots that I've been trying to buy for years, and they won't sell them to me. So I used this space to show kind of how the water is flowing in, and to stage an area to show you the direction that north is coming from, and to show you the highest point on the map to help you get an idea of the topography of my property, because to put the topographic lines on here by hand would have taken me forever. So I figured I would just explain it in a video. And then here is the highest point on my property. Now, if you look at my water management video, I have 3 of them in a playlist, and I'm going to be creating more. If you look at that, I start in video 1 on the highest point of the property and work my way down. The next thing to look at will be this right here, the lowest point on the property. It's significant because if you check out where my mouse is and draw a diagonal line here from north to south, okay, all of the water to the south of this line here, the southeast here, all of this that my mouse is covering, all that drains through this lowest point of the property eventually. Now the rest of it, the part that's west of this diagonal, drains over here where this arrow is, the excess drain point for the water from the backyard. So all of my subsequent water management videos will be covering this section, this backyard section, and how the water flows through there. I've already covered this water flow. Except for this light blue stuff I haven't covered. This is planned, if you look at the legend. And I know I said that I'm going to cover some stuff that's not labeled, and I know technically when you have a legend like this, it means everything's labeled, but you'll see in a minute why it might need some explanation. So that's a nice segue into some of these unlabeled spots. We'll start with the green, this darker green stuff, indicating that it's under cultivation. These standalone little squares like you see here, those are trees. These 2 particular ones are pear trees. This one here, where my mouse is, and here, those are Chickasaws. Let's see. This next to the water is a standalone square north of the root crop bed. And this other square here is also a standalone square, but they're not growing trees. This one my mouse is on right now is growing wild onion, and this other one is growing garlic. And I just did a video on dormant crops. If you want to see those have come up. Those grow through the fall and winter. One thing I'll mention on this Mustang grape bed, this back area here is where the Mustang grapevines actually grow, and this other section I include as part of the Mustang grape bed is persimmons and hazelnuts. And I have grown mustard greens up in here and peanuts as well in the past. Let's see here. The root crop garden bed, I've mentioned in that video that it was the first garden bed I ever made, and it was designed to grow root crops because my soil is so clay and rocky that digging root crops out usually ended up destroying the crop. So that's what that was built for. Let's see here. What else may be unlabeled? Okay, these gray areas. It says that it's future infrastructure or structure. This gray area behind the house is planned to be a greenhouse, and this one behind the shed is planned to be a potting area. When I did my experiments those couple of seasons for selling plants, it became very apparent that I need to build an area for high productivity for potting. Doing it in my ad hoc way with the folding tables and everything, it's just not very efficient. It's kind of hard on your back. So when you get older, you're going to have to build yourself a nice, easy area to do all your potting if you want to do a nursery operation. Or even if you're doing just a large garden, you're going to find yourself doing a lot of that kind of work. So you're going to need to build an area. And I've mentioned that I've demolished my compost heap, which was located over here where my cursor is. And I moved all that I had into this gray area here. This gray area here serves as a place for dumping that kind of stuff, soil, wood chips. When I go pick up wood chips, I dump them here. In the future, if I ever want to ramp up and sell a bunch of potted plants and maybe I don't have enough soil generated myself, I can have it dumped here. So I know I've mentioned that I dig out soil from my pond, but between that and my own compost, it's usually plenty enough to keep my own garden beds self-sustaining, but it's not necessarily enough to sell excess. So for that, for extra inputs, there's a good chance I may have to haul stuff in. In the past, I had to haul stuff in for when I wanted to sell potted plants. So it's very highly likely I'll need that. So I'll keep that space empty. And behind this, you see there's this one lone square of wild space. And it will always be wild space. It's a male cedar tree. So if you want to know why some of this stuff looks the way it is, that's part of the reason. In this tomato bed, I included some blackberries that are growing next to them. That might be worth mentioning. So if you're looking at these videos for each of these garden beds, if there's any discrepancies, I'm doing my best to try to go through and explain what they may be. And I do believe I've already covered all the planned water space. If I haven't covered the planned water space, I'll do a little section on it. Let's see. And I think that covers all of the unlabeled spaces. I don't think there's anything. The only other thing I think I would mention is the undeveloped yard. I have a video on it. I think it's called Crops in the Undeveloped Yard. What designates undeveloped from developed is that in the undeveloped yard, we have no real garden beds. Real being the soil has not been converted to grow domestic crops yet. Over here in the backyard, I have this little bed here and labeled, and when I made my Crops in the Undeveloped Yard video, I included this little garden bed, I believe. But in this map, I've called it cultivated space because technically there is a garden bed there now. It's not really completed, but there's enough of a garden bed there now I can grow domestic crops. And even though it's the first season of that garden bed, and it's not very productive, I've went ahead and included it as cultivated. So that's probably worth mentioning. What makes it uncultivated, undeveloped versus developed is that if it's undeveloped, there's no real garden bed there. The soil is still that clay-like, rocky soil mostly. And I think that about covers any of the unlabeled stuff. So I mentioned that I have this impoundment here. This impoundment, I mentioned it in my water flow video where my cursor is pointed. But the purpose of that is to try to keep it from flowing try to reduce the volume of water flowing into the pond by giving an overflow that flows in front of these garden beds. That should help saturate those garden beds, give additional water saturation to help fill the pond as it percolates through the soil, and then keep it in the landscape longer to maybe fill up a pond down here. By reducing that volume of water and having a slight impoundment to slow the water here, I'm hoping it'll drop the sediment here, or more of it here, and keep it from going into the pond. Now, right now, I mentioned I use that pond to make my garden beds, but with free soil. But in the future, I won't want that. So those are some of the measures I'm taking to try to get ahead of the curve here on keeping the sediment out, the silt out of this pond. If you look right here, you'll see it looks like a pond is connected to this pond. It's all going to be one pond, but it may be two. It may actually be one when I'm all done, but I'm counting on this actually being a separate pond. But the overflow will be here, which it's already here. It's already flowing this way, and will go into another catchment pond. And then on the new lots, there's already a low spot here that's already having water set, so I'm hoping that will serve as another catchment pond there, so to be planned. And this pond right at the base of I don't mention this in my videos, but I do plan on putting a pond here. But there's a rock wall here where water percolates, and it's very clean water, and it will fill this up quite nicely for most of the year. So that's another planned pond. So let's see here. I think that about covers it. Yes, the water already flows this way because, like I mentioned, it percolates for half the year, and it's very clean water, and it flows. I've had it tested. It flows into the pond to fill it up. So I think that covers all the planned water. So we'll move on to these numbers. Where do the numbers come from? They come from the map. It's all just basically counting up the map. I wanted the numbers to kind of match the map, so that way nobody would complain too much. But I have bounced them against the actuals, at least the totals that I can remember, because I usually only remember totals. I don't usually remember the details of how I calculated it. And from what I can remember, this is pretty accurate, within 0.05 to 0.2 acres of accuracy. So any number I come up with in here, you can probably add anywhere from 0.05 to 0.2 acres. And the actual will be somewhere between what number I produce here and that number. So that gives you an idea of the total size we're dealing with. The total size of the property, if you count all these squares, comes up to 35,000 square foot, or 0.8 acres. But under cultivation, these green squares count up to about 0.07 acres. And these light green squares in the undeveloped yard add up to an additional 0.016 acres to give you a total of 0.086 or 0.09 acres. Now, in my calculations, I had down that we already had 0.10 or a tenth of an acre under cultivation, or just shy of that. So this is coming pretty close to what I had calculated there. And let's see. For these additional lots that I bought, I'm calculating that I'll have at least 0.26 additional acres of growing space in just this new property here. And I think I mentioned that throughout these woods there's trees I can remove that would give more growing space, and I calculated that there's approximately 0.16 additional acres there. And it might actually be higher than that, but I estimated there's at least that much up in these wooded areas, these native growing spaces that I could add after I cull out some of those male ash juniper trees. So I think that clocks us in. Let's see what that gets us. My math is not so great here. So that's 0.18 plus another 6 on that, to be 0.26, and then another 0.26, so we're getting at 0.52, and then I had this 0.069, so roughly about 0.55 acres, topping out somewhere probably between 0.45 and 0.55 acres of cultivated space when I'm all said and done. That's not too terrible. considering it's zero point 0.8 acres in total. Sorry about the red shift. But so yeah, that's where I came up with the numbers. It came from counting the squares on the map. That gives you a rough idea of how much cultivated space I can end up with. I would want to turn you and steer you towards a video that is on Edible Acres channel, and it's an older video. I want to say it's over 10 years old, and he illustrates for you, demonstrates what a tenth of an acre can grow if you do it permaculture style. And so for my goals in terms of how much money I want to make with the nursery and how much food I want to grow for my family, I think having that much cultivated space, at least a tenth of an acre, is really all I need to accomplish what I want to accomplish. If there's any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment. And I'll be seeing you guys later. I hope you have a good one.